Rick,
Hey.
thanks for coming.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you over. This is a series of talks that we've been doing for quite some time. In particular, where the focus is, some of the views from the Valley and the integration between the world of startups and the world of corporates. And what better option than having you that grew up here and have lived through numerous cycles of success stories, from the PHP days, SGI, Microsoft, and actually now moving into the dark side of the one of the investment, in particular with some links with Italy. So very excited to cover a number of topics as they unfold. So let's start from, you're actually from here. There are not that many people there from here that I met.
I was born in San Francisco. My parents immigrated from Italy, and my grandfather was a founder of one of the founders of the garbage company, a bunch of Genovese. Actually started the first.
What garbage company? What was it?
It was called Sunset Scavengers. That's what it was
Go
called.
figure.
And my father came over after the war and started working to do what he could do, which was collect garbage. So that was my roots in San Francisco.
That's funny. And then, so you went to school here, right?
Yeah.
So the whole, also university.
Well, I went to university here. My family moved north in the North Bay, so most of my school years were up in Santa Rosa.
Okay, so still here, which is again kind of unique. So actually, let's talk about the education part, because we tend to see, people extremely successful in the corporate world, they're like yourself, and then we're going to cover a little bit of the highlights. The typical path, they go to Stanford to get a PhD in computer science, MBA in other places. That's not your path.
That's not my story at all.
That's not your story. So let's talk about your story, because it's beautiful as, part of the American dream, as eventually can end up in a very, very strategic position without having to go through the typical path. So let's talk about this a little bit.
Yeah, I was actually worse than an average student in high school and so on. I never took school very seriously. And then somehow when I graduated from high school, I decided to get my act together. So I actually started in a junior college, and I went from getting barely passing grades to straight A's, and I don't know why.
From 1 year to the next.
From just one summer change.
That was a beautiful summer.
So I guess I wasn't stupid, but I was not motivated for whatever reason. So I became serious about success, and I went to a junior college, and then I didn't have very much money. I ended up commuting to school in San Francisco and got my bachelor's degree in finance and accounting, and it worked. It worked for me. It worked for me. And my objective all along was to get through school so I could go to work.
What was your first corporate job? Because I want to talk about this a little bit. I don't know how different that is from we're talking now the late 70s?
Late 70s, yes. Yeah.
How different it is today. There are certain companies that it's very unlikely that they hire people not going through the mainstream, what they consider the educational path, unless they buy companies. So through typically, the achievement in the business. So how was your path?
My first job was with Hewlett Packard, and it was a strange way. I mean, you're right. Most of the graduating class, because Hewlett Packard was growing very fast. You can't win against gravity. If a market is moving in a certain direction, if you're with it, even if you're not that good, you can be successful. And if you're against it, even if you're really good, you can still fail. And so you can't defy that dynamics. And that was I found myself in a few situations through my career where that was the case on both sides, and being able to transform from being against the wind to being with it is challenging, can be incredibly rewarding, but it's very hard to pull off.
What happened to SGI? I mean, HP is an extremely nice example of the one company that would be able to reinvent himself in totally different businesses. SGI didn't have the ability to do that, probably.
No, I mean, SGI, the desktop business and the graphics business totally went away, and then they built. They had a unique architecture, computing architecture, that for some applications, and for some increasingly applications now, when you talk about AI and other really performance segments where you need a lot of I/O, etc. So they were acquired by HP.
Okay, so eventually, ironically, and they gave their offices to Google, right? It's not the same office.
Yeah, my office was there.
Yeah,
my office was there.
The campus. I remember
still
seeing some.
I mean, SGI was like the high flyer, right?
This is funny to see, how, and now these cycles, in fact, I think these days is getting shorter and shorter. I mean, HP being an exception, but the cycle, from hype to extremely flying high, and then look around and how to survive is getting.
I think that companies are going to reflect the market. So the fact that market cycles are happening faster are by definition going to mean that companies are going to be under more and more pressure to kind of shift and redirect themselves. And as I said, that's hard to do.
What do you think the HP has been successful to some extent? No, definitely successful considering how many cycles they had to weather. What do you think that was the ability of rebuilding?
Yeah, so I think that went away. But I would say during most of its life, there were a number of fundamental innovations that occurred that were huge. I was a part of one of them, and that was the printer business. I mean, we built a laser printer that sold for like $80,000. I mean, it was this 45 page per minute laser printer that was used for certain applications that sold for like $80,000. And then I was the ability to be the general manager of the laser printer division that introduced the first desktop laser for $3,500. So anyway, that was one in the whole printer business, which today people think is a big yawner, right? But we built a multi-billion-dollar business from nothing. That was one. I mean, there was getting into the computing business was a whole new innovation for the company. There was a period of time which was a huge business for the company. This will shock you, and that was a handheld calculator.
I remember that.
Which were accredited. They're very high end. I mean, they're always the cheap ones, but they had the really. And I still have it on I have the app now on my smartphone because I still like the 12C. So there were a number of those, and I think the reason was that Bill and Dave, the founders, had this view that hurt us for a while. But at its core was, when we get too large, when an organization and a business gets too large, they need to divide themselves, and we would move it to another city, and we'd move the team there, and they'd create another business. And so there was an entrepreneurial, fast-moving. Everyone worked hard to do that. This place is too big. I want to do my own. So
that was part of the culture. We cannot grow big because when big is against the flexibility, dynamics.
Yeah, and the innovation model. Now, the bad news was that made us look haphazard, and we were trying to get into the systems business. That had a lot of problems because things didn't work. You had to put stuff together, and they didn't work well together. And, we couldn't sell a solution together. Everyone wanted to sell individual pieces. It became kind of unmanageable. And again, this is where the market. When we were an instrument-oriented, individual product-oriented business, it was great. When we tried to build systems, it didn't work, and now it's kind of gone the other way.
I think their ability is to be able to have time enough and flexibility to shift from one to the other. So in that case, were there a spin-off of the companies, or were like working groups that eventually? No,
they were spin-offs. We had this culture that the division, it was called the
division was per se
was the P&L, and a division had a whole management team and all the functions. Mm-hmm. They shared usually a sales organization stuff, but they had the team. And when I was a division manager, everybody said that's the best job in the company, and it was. I mean,
it was like the ownership.
Yeah,
of
you're like a little CEO, but it wasn't so little. I mean, they got to be multi-billion-dollar businesses.
Cool. So now Microsoft. Did you work with Bill Gates at the time, or was it?
Well, I worked. Steve Ballmer recruited me.
Right. You knew it from before, from SGI?
Yeah, from HP. We did a lot in printing with Microsoft, and because we wanted our printers to be well integrated within Windows, and so we did that. So we had a relationship there. I went up actually, the story goes, I went up with a team from SGI, and we went through some areas of cooperation. And I remember Steve pulled me off and says, what?
Steve was CEO at the time?
No, he wasn't. He was kind of COO.
Okay,
but
was on the path
to
was
yeah.
pretty clear.
And that's when I joined. It was when he, I took the consumer businesses, I guess I would say. I mean, there were like 16 different businesses, things we acquired, and so on. And I kind of took responsibility for those. And Steve, began to work more in the Windows enterprise business.
And you became president of
Yeah. And so then what happened was the transition between Bill Gates moving to become chairman and Steve becoming CEO. There were lots of issues, and so I took a kind of a COO president's role during that transition cycle of a couple of years, and then inevitably Steve got his own strength, and it was difficult for both of us to coexist.
Let's talk about that, because I mean, Ballmer is one of this personality that is definitely sticks out in good and bad. I think he's building his own personas and marketing around that. But how was to work with Steve Ballmer? Okay, next question.
I don't know. The Microsoft culture was a challenge. Microsoft culture was a challenge because it was a little bit random. I mean, there were certain things that were principled, but
was it changing because of Bill Gates moving out, or it was part of the culture already when he was there?
Well, I think there was this culture where Bill and Steve kind of made all the decisions, and the company was getting large, and it was more difficult to do that. I went in thinking, well, I make decisions, and so I remember, here's a funny story. So I had these 16 businesses that were losing a lot of money. We had a lot of money, and I saw the risk, by the way, of having too much money, because you make bad decisions when you have too much money. And so I thought, okay, my job is to fix this. So I remember I took those 16 and I said, we're going to be in 4 areas: gaming, mobility, mobile devices, web services. So, things like MSN, et cetera. And the 4th was TV.
For good picks.
So I said those 16 things either are going to integrate and fit in a strategy there, or we close it or sell it. And so that's what we went down the path to do. And I remember when I closed the first business.
Tragedy.
It was a tax software, that's on a CD kind of business.
What was it? What was it called? What was the product?
I don't remember what it was called. It was Microsoft Tax or something.
Okay.
And the team came in and said, we need to hire a bunch of people because we were missing these products. Intuit at the time owned the market
already,
90% market share. And I said, so we need like 40 heads or 20 heads or something like that. And I said, I have a more basic question. It's like, why are we in this business? I mean, we're never going to catch up. If anything's going to be online, it's going to be this, because the tax code is changing. You can't, it's an online business. So we ought to make it an online business, and we ought to not do this. So I ended up closing the business. And I'll remember when Steve Ballmer comes busted into my office.
He didn't ask you. You didn't.
He just comes. I didn't ask. I would have told him when we had a one-on-one or something. To me, it was like obvious. We're losing all this money. I can't. And I was going to tell you, he comes busted in my office. He goes, Rick, we don't give up here. We don't do this. We don't give up.
I started jumping and sweating.
I said, Steve, I can't operate 16 businesses smarter. I just can't do it. We have to make some decisions about where we're going to invest and where we're not going to invest. So I remember he walked out. As he walked out the door, he says, okay, I'm going to let you do this time. And then I started getting asked the emails from Bill Gates for the same thing.
So it was part of the culture, letting go.
Not letting go. And we had so many things that needed to be let go. We ended up spinning out Expedia at the time. That was one of the decisions I made. And there were like 5 kind of things that we changed or stopped doing. And
how many years did you spend then eventually at Microsoft?
3 years.
Okay.
Yeah, 3 years.
So it was short and
sweet. It was good. No, it was a good experience. I'm very happy I did it. I mean, I can I learned a lot.
Yeah.
And you know, I never had worked at a pure software company, and so that was a really important time.
So let's talk about some of the topics that are of interest for this chat. That is the kind of integration of corporates, and you've lived at the top of a few of those, and the world of innovation from the outside. And things have changed to some extent. As we mentioned, cycles are much shorter. What worked well? You already hinted at Microsoft, at the fact that there's a culture of building pieces rather than try to streamline them. But what worked well at the time when it came from a internal innovation versus try to accelerating buying innovation from outside? What were your experiences? How do you think is that different today, if it is different?
Yeah, so I'm hoping that larger companies are getting better at it. I mean, my experience is it was very difficult to acquire outside companies and technology and integrate them. I think the industry has gotten better in that process, but I think it's for the obvious reason. Sometimes you acquire a company, you have the cultural problem, the integration doesn't work. And one of the my more recent experience with that, I was a company, I was actually CEO for 7 months, that we did a lot of acquisition of kind of late startups, companies that were launched. And one of the mistakes we made there was that we would acquire something and we thought we acquired it, that it was ready to go. And in every case, when you acquire a startup, you have to be willing to invest a lot of money. And I think a lot of people to take it to its conclusion. And because rarely is a startup have something that would work in a larger company without building on it. Right. And so I think that's one of the principles that now anytime an earlier stage company is acquired, there has to be a plan that includes more investment. And that makes it sometimes tough, because I think people look for a quick hit here. I could buy this, I've got a hold of my product line, I'll buy this thing, and everything will be fine. But when you buy it, you start to realize, oh no, I'm missing these features, I've got this problem here, I've got it. And they've tended not to invest for that, and then the thing kind of flounders, and they say, gee, we shouldn't do this anymore.
Yeah, so looking from inside, most of at least that's my perception, but the companies that are more successful in integrating innovation from outside in are the ones that have a very well-developed post-integration, post-acquisition. So the integration team is much bigger than a corporate development at M&A, because that's when the problem starts.
It's easy to make it. It's easy to make this into a deal.
Negotiation only. So let's talk about the culture of innovation, things that you thought that worked well in some of your experiences. How to maintain a culture of innovation from within. You mentioned HP, the idea of keeping things in small teams and as insulated as possible. What else you thought in different between Microsoft, SGI?
I think one of the biggest things is the ability to fail and the ability to make a mistake. That was great at HP when I was first there.
Yeah, from the beginning.
It was written part of our culture.
So you knew that
you could make a mistake. But if you have a culture where you're a company person, you're a guy who's kind of a company guy, and if you make a mistake, you might lose your job. You don't take risks. So I think that was the biggest thing, and then people confuse that and say, oh, so performance doesn't matter. Well, of course it matters. I mean, but you can't so discourage people from trying things. Right. And the most important thing, though, is when you try something and you see it's not going to succeed, you have to change. You have to kill it or change it or do something. And that's where sometimes it fails. It's okay, you're allowed to make a mistake, but then people don't cut the loss and move on. It's always, because in a larger company, it's not like a startup where you face funding limitations. You can usually go longer than you should.
Yeah, and then you're
and
gone.
then it makes it worse. Yeah.
So what made it explicitly acceptable at HP? So what made you think that failure was one of the options that you could go through as long as or risk as part of that? Because there are plenty of books now written about how to incorporate a culture where failure is accepted, so people are incentivized to risk for it better. Now in corporations, but you're talking about 20 years ago here.
Yeah. I think it was hard. I mean, this will sound like a negative, but at HP back then it was hard to get fired, right? So So I think
you felt
you felt insulated a little bit,
but in a good way.
And if you had the right, there was also there's the combination of the reward for success in taking a risk and kind of the protection of failure that allowed you to go and do things like that. I look at my career at HP and I look at some of the decisions I made and the risks I took, and some worked well, some did. I had one where I could have been fired, which is was in the printer business when I was trying. That sounds funny today, but I was trying. Our team was committed to get the first laser printer that would sell below $1,000.
In when? In the 80s?
In the 80s. And nobody had done it before. We wanted to be first because we were facing a lot of competition from Asian suppliers, Asian companies. So to get there, I had to make commitments to a big supplier. I did that the other day too. And I had to make some volume commitments, and I was wrong. I remember. I think
you were wrong in the volume.
They said, look, you have to sell 100,000 of these things a month. And the marketing forecast said we could sell 60,000, and I said but the market, who knew, right? So I committed to do the 100,000. We sold 65,000 or something. So it was just math to the point where we had a massive amount of inventory. It was
didn't know what to do with those.
It would have been death in any other company. The financial risk was huge, and I couldn't shut the supplier off. Because I made a commitment. It was a Japanese supplier. I'd given him my word, and I had to go through extraordinary lengths to get it to include a flight to Japan, and apologizing in front of the whole factory and doing all this stuff. But we got through it, and we didn't have to write off any inventory. I'll tell you one of the side notes. I remember going to a warehouse in San Jose, and there was these printers were just as far as you could see stacked up, and then the supplier, the operating guy, goes, hey, we have a problem. I said, we have some number of printers where the supplier made a mistake, and the wire in the fuser was undersized, and the wire would burn up and smoke, and the printer would stop working.
Doesn't sound good.
That's not good. I said, okay, well, so we gotta go through this. What are the serial numbers? We don't know.
Go figure.
So we had to go through all these printers and find the ones with these problems. I mean, it was an incredible mess. I mean, I should have been fired maybe, but at the end we succeeded. Right. The competition we destroyed the competition, and it worked. But that was an example of a risk that I took. I didn't have to go ask for a lot of permission. I took the risk. And it was rocky, and I survived, and it turned out I had the chance to turn it into a success, and that was a culture that
tells much about a culture of loyalty. It goes both ways. The company and employees that they're both investing in the same direction. And it seems to me that today this is so much harder. The average length that people, especially developers, stay with a company here is 18 months. So that loyalty is impossible to request. And so you try to find shortcuts. How would I retain a little longer? Forget it, 20 years. I mean, 20 years is probably not even, a potential objective.
So a lot of companies don't last that long.
They're gone, right? 20 years. So but still is to such a different extent that is number one issue here is really the retention that goes over a couple of years. And so you invest so much. So totally different culture. So how does that compare with Microsoft? Their culture of building innovation from within. What do you think that it was working there at the time?
I mean, Microsoft was also, also there was the company took risks for sure. I mean, as we know, a lot of them did not materialize, right?
Well, it was fortunate that had a cash cow that was so significant.
So you could take more risks when you're
with
I think,
printing money.
At the time it was like $1 billion. Cash flow was like $1 billion a month in Windows and Office or something like that. Some huge number. So there it was a little more. I would just say it was a little more complicated. You can take risks, but you had to. And it wasn't one of these things where you could just go off on your own and take this risk. You need to have it well, as they call it, socialized across the organization.
There's
have
more
other
politics.
people buy into your risk, which was always a challenge because everyone thought they had a smarter idea and stuff. So it could be done, and if you had the political foundation, you could do it.
Okay, so it was much more political in that sense. And you had to be smarter.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long time since I've been there, but I think Satya, the current CEO, did that with the cloud side.
That's really well.
And he did really well, and I think that's why he's the CEO, and he's brought that energy to other parts because of that risk of that big transition.
Yeah.
Because as you know, Microsoft was almost always behind. Even there, they were a little behind, but executed well. But they're always behind in a big industry transition.
Yeah, Another actually did extremely well in the last few years. It really got a kind of a new foundation to some extent. Yeah. So, I mean, kind of similar to HP. So I need to give them credit for that. So, how do you spend your time now? I know you're investing in startups, getting.
Yeah, so I left being a CEO in 2011, and I decided tried to figure out what was I going to do. And I started doing projects, and through you, Marco, I got involved with Mind the Bridge. It was a little different back then, but I started doing some stuff in Italy, and then I went back because one of the boards I was chairman of. I went back to be an interim CEO, so I started doing less again, and then
it wasn't really a startup. It was kind of more mature.
No, I was in a startup. That was we were splitting. In another case of splitting, we took one public company, and we split it into two public companies.
Yeah.
And it wasn't going well, so I went back to the BCO. It started to be very successful. Billions of dollars value created for shareholders through that process. So I did that, and then I came back out, and I started just doing more and more with Italy, and less in the U.S. So I'm involved in a few companies in the U.S., but most of my work is in Italy. I go every other month to Milan, and
do you have fun?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I've learned. I've been telling people lately that I've been doing this now for a while. I mean, it's like I always book my next trip before I even finish the trip I'm on, and I've said two things. One is I've really grown to love. I mean, I'm Italian, but I've really grown to love and appreciate the Italian lifestyle and culture. Right. It is phenomenal.
You didn't talk about business. Talk about lifestyle and.
I'm just saying that's one angle. I'm going to get to business in a second, which is one angle.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, I realize how hard it is to do business in Italy. And
it's not the only place, but it's
not the only place, but it's so that contradiction makes my head want to explode every now and then.
So you have beautiful dinners, but terrible meetings. I don't mean
just dinners. I mean the people. I mean, there's just so many aspects of it that are really phenomenal.
Yeah.
And yet, when you carry that into the business environment, it's hard to get things done. I mean, I'm not trying to sound critical. I think there's great innovation in Italy.
Yeah.
The Italian market is very tough.
Yeah.
So if you build a startup to address the Italian market, I mean, most markets just aren't big enough. And so the digital acceptance is behind in Italy. All of these things make it really difficult. Yeah. The average ticket price on almost everything is lower in Italy. So if you're doing a startup and you want to charge $10 €10 for something, you might only be able to charge 5
Yeah.
or whatever.
There's somebody
and
undercutting you.
so that's been the journey, and we're still working it. I mean, I think this time, these next couple of years in Italy are really important, because if you look at investments in startups, the early stage seed innovation investments have actually been pretty strong. If you
At least they exist.
They exist, and actually we have a
ago.
chart that we like to use that we compare it like to even Germany, and you see in that early stage that there's a lot going on. But then when you move to the
Growth.
beyond A round, B round, C, etc., there's been almost nothing there, and it's starting to emerge now, where there are a few companies that need bigger rounds of investment and more focus on scaling up. The unclear thing still is whether there could be exits, right? I think there were in 2018, I think there were like 8 exits.
Total. Yeah, so
like
that's
nothing. I mean, like that. And only a couple of 2 or 3 of them were really good.
Right, and mostly zero IPOs, and so that's part of the problem. Is there no? I mean, the dynamics of the economics behind the world of venture capital are restricted by the very little options of exits. There's very little liquidity, and the IPOs is no market, and so that gets into why would I invest growth stage unless you have an expansion international.
That's right. So we're in Innogest, we're in the process of raising a new fund, and so now we're going back to people for the 3rd time and saying, let's do this again. And that lack of exit, thing is what drives long, return cycles, which is tough for investors.
Yeah. So listen, last question. So if you were a young entrepreneur, maybe Italian entrepreneur, that you had options to to develop your career, where would you put your bets today? In what geographies, what areas, anything that you would do if you were in their shoes?
The question, I think a lot of time the natural reaction, people say they want to come here, right? And I caution people about that. I say it's not so easy here, and we have the same thing as a fund. So we're an investment fund. Where are we going to invest? We're still investing in Italy, because our view is that that's what we do. We rather find the best opportunities in Italy that we know than to go find the 2nd or 3rd tier opportunities, because we don't know them as well outside of Italy. We invest outside of Italy, but we try to be focused in that area. And I think so I think that my advice would be to be international, to try to build a global business, and maybe build it from Italy, because there are some advantages, in terms of availability of talent and cost and a variety of things. But I would, from the very outset, be thinking of a strategy that would make it work globally, because I think that's the only way to get ultimately to a return and to an exit. Now, not always, but that's what I would attempt to do.
Any specific vertical where you feel bullish? We think that is you're definitely riding the wave of something that automatically would grow with you, or you can grow with?
That's hard. I mean, our focus is, here's the interesting thing. I'm going to speak this from an investment fund perspective, and then we'll try to turn it. We always say we want to be focused. We want to be focused on verticals. And the problem in Italy we found is if we focused on verticals and the verticals aren't big enough, you end up making bad investments, because you have to invest your money, and if you're going to invest in 10 things and you're in one vertical where there isn't very much use, you end up, the line of what's acceptable gets too low. So we try to say we invest in segments where Italy is relevant, verticals where there's a corporate industry within Italy.
Right.
And I would say that is still something. I think there's opportunity. I think Italian corporates will come around. I think there'll be more opportunity for exits. But I still think being being global is important. And if you come from an industry where Italy is relevant, it's easier to become global.
Right, because at least you have a...
So like food is an example.
Right. Yeah.
You know, we worked with Deloitte to do this food accelerator thing in Milan. And they scouted for a bunch of companies. And most of the companies were from outside of Italy, but they're in Milan, you know, working together to build companies. So because Italy has credibility when it comes to food. So I think an Italian industry where Italy has a name, and to do it globally, where you have a seat at the table, you know, is important.
Unless you have an advantage over the others, because it's not just building a digital business in Italy. Why should you do that?
And then the other point I would say, the other problem in Italy, if often is the model is different in that companies come, you know, as this is a mistake we've made. You come to us with a startup, and we say, okay, we're going to invest $2 million, $1 million, but we're going to give you 500 now. And we'll give you 500 when you reach this milestone. And these milestones are typically revenue. So what happens is if you're a good entrepreneur, you got to meet your milestones. You put all your focus on growing revenue. And as a result of that, you don't invest in the foundation, especially the technical innovation that's going to make you last even longer. And so I think that's different than U.S. And I just met with a friend who's doing a startup, and he's been working on it for 2 years. He's just getting ready to launch, you know, and he's been building the product, testing the product, getting beta, you know, building the product. And before he's ready to launch, he's going to have an in-depth, detailed product. In Italy, you tend not to do that.
Which is, I mean, the lean startup methodology is actually teaching you to do the quick cycles with the market rather than stopping and building a lot of foundation.
But what happens, I find, is we have companies that are been around for 5 years, and there just isn't much depth to them.
Right, and so
I think that may also be a function of how much capital they have. So because of I wasn't saying necessarily you should wait forever, but I am saying that as an investor, we're saying there needs to be more investment in bigger investment in fewer companies
and go deeper.
That can go deeper and can go ahead and do that, but it's building the technology and have building something that's sustainable and something that you can sell. Because a lot of times we look at these companies.
What'd you do with that?
And you say, well, what are we going to do with this?
Yeah.
We got this exchange company, you know, this marketplace that exchanges something, right? Yeah. And it's built with very thin technology. It's a website. I mean, like, they're crazy. They've got, you know, $2 million in revenue. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
You know? And that's part of the exit problem.
Cool. All right, Rick.
Okay.
Until soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Okay.